building, Turner Hall, over on the Ag campus. Jonathan Baldwin Turner was a faculty member at Illinois College over in Jacksonville, and his mission in life was to argue for the establishment of what were then called industrial universities for the children of the working class. And he argued in front of people like Abraham Lincoln and other political leaders of the day, and that eventually led to the decision by the United States Congress in 1862 to grant land. And at that point, the country, the nation, owned a lot of federal lands, and those lands were to be granted to each state, and then those lands sold by the state, and those dollars or those funds used to establish a university. So that's the history of how the University of Illinois came into being. Lincoln said this: "Upon the subject of education, not presuming to dictate any plan or system respecting it, I can only say that I view it as the most important subject which we as a people can be engaged in. That every man receive at least a moderate education, and thereby be enabled to read the histories of their own and other countries, etc." Leaders in that era appreciated the importance of education in a time when very few people had access to higher education beyond just those elements of literacy that enabled one to read and write and do a bit of numbers. There are consequences for not educating our citizens, and I want to say a bit about that. Bill Gates said this recently: "We simply cannot sustain an economy based on innovation unless our citizens are educated in mathematics, science, or engineering." And you can understand that Mr. Gates, in his field and his business, would focus on that domain of a university. Chad Halliday, who's the CEO of DuPont, recently said, "If the U.S. doesn't get its act together, DuPont is going to go to the countries that do." And I think others have made the same point. It matters whether or not a nation has a good educational system. It matters whether or not education is broadly available to the citizens of the country. And it matters a great deal to the economic and social success of a country. If you go back again in our history to the mid-1800s, we were in the midst of a civil war. That war culminated and resolved some issues that this country had struggled with since its inception as a constitutional democracy. And it was a time when there was undergoing the development of cities and industries in those cities, factories and so forth. Railroads were being developed, and there was a need for people who were prepared to be engineers, individuals who knew how to design factories and knew how to manage commerce, attorneys who could write contracts, accountants who could do the numbers, and all of those who would have some understanding of history and the liberal arts. And it was also a time, as those cities began to develop, when the nation needed to transition from being a subsistence society where well over half the population lived in rural poverty and produced their own food and consumed it, to a nation that could afford to have a very significant number of the population living in cities, doing other pursuits, creating an economy, and a smaller number of individuals living in the countryside to produce food. The land-grant university system, the public university system that emerged in the 1870s, 80s, 1890s, and then grew much more robust in the first half of this century, contributed enormously to that. And over the years, I've had the opportunity to sit with any number of our more senior alums who came through here in the 30s, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and listen to their stories of how they came from relatively limited backgrounds, in many cases the first generation to ever go to college, in some cases coming from families where English wasn't the common language at home. They came to the University of Illinois, and there was enormous personal benefit. Their lives were transformed, and they went on to do many, many different things and to do them with great success. Education, public education, enables individuals. It benefits individuals and allows people to satisfy their curiosity, if they desire to have opportunities to grow their personal wealth. It allows communities to function. I came across a statistic just the other day. When the population with college degrees in a city increases by 10%, wages for everyone rise by 7.8%. There's a relationship between the economic success for a whole community based on the number of people who have advanced or college degrees. College towns, if you think about it, and towns with a high percentage of education usually have lower unemployment rates than places that do not. I don't think we can ignore the role that education also has in having an informed citizenry that participates in a democracy. And I truly believe that's an important function that we perform, helping people to develop their capacity to think about issues, to understand the history of issues, and to make decisions that are based not just upon one's feelings, but one's true understanding of the underlying principles. What does education do for a state? And that begs the question, why should a state actually pay to have individuals educated? Educated as educational systems, education universities, I don't need to tell you this, but they contribute enormously to economic development. This university has an incredible record of creating economic development in the state. I think often we think of that as, well, inventions that get transferred into technologies, and those technologies are the basis for companies or whatever, and that is the source of economic development. The reality is that probably the most valuable product that we produce is our individual students who earn their degrees here and then go forth to be part of the state's economy. And I think it's important that we not stop there, because it's not just about those who go into industry and do those kinds of jobs that are technical in nature, but also those who go into the arts, those who go into government and policy positions, and in so doing allow our society to be functional, in so doing allow us to be part of a society that has opportunity for other kinds of enjoyment. The present financial situation is making our circumstances and our ability to deliver on our mission very, very difficult. I'm concerned a great deal about the increases in tuition that we have had to put in place over the last several years. The cost of operating this place is enormous, and it's significant in part because